Hakodate, years old, August 13th, 1878. After 2 days of rainstorms, the weather has turned very fine. I like the cooler weather here better than the weather on the mainland. When the fog lifts, it doesn't reveal forested hills, but naked mountains, volcanoes that burned only recently. Sandy beaches border the bay, and the water is as blue as the Adriatic. It reminds of the Gibraltar, but as you start to think, you sing the voice again. A kuruma passes with little yellow-skinned men pulling it, and you realize that you're in Japan. In Hakodate, the streets are wide and clean, but the houses are little more than piles of wood. The whole town looks very temporary, with the roofs held down by heavy stones. Some roofs are covered with dirt and crops of grass. This is supposed to prevent houses from catching fire. AinO Hut, Biratori, August 23rd. For the past 3 days, I have been living in an AinO hut with an AinO family. It has the most interesting part of my journey. An AinO guide on a horse brought us here, through the forest to Biratori. We had to bring all of our own food and cooking utensils for our stay. Biratori is the largest AinO village in this region. It is beautifully located among forests, mountains, and the river, but it is a lonely place. We first stopped at the house of Benri, the chief. Benri was away, but Shinondi, his nephew, and several other men received us with the greatest respect. They greeted us by waving their hands inward and stroking their beards, which is their custom. They were extremely polite, helping us unload our horses and offering food immediately. They placed their best mats by my bed. They told me that Benri welcomed me to stay as long as I wanted, and asked me to excuse them for having different ways and customs than my own. That evening, about 80 men came to Benri's house to bid me welcome. Several were grand-looking old men with full gray beards. Age is greatly respected here. Handing around some tobacco, I told them that I came from a land in the sea very far away, where they saw the sun go down, and that I had come to ask them many questions so that I could tell my own people about them. Shinondi and 4 others in the village speak Japanese. We spoke with the AinO man for many hours. My questions and their answers went from English to Japanese to AinO and back again. But before they told me anything, they begged me not to tell the Japanese government that they shared their customs with me, or they may get into trouble. They are an extremely polite people, and even Ito says they are better than he expected. After they ate a stew of ground millet, roots, green beans, seaweed, dried fish, and venison, they brought out the sake. They poured it into lacquered bowls and laid a finely carved sake stick across the bowl. These sticks are used to make sake offerings to the fire and to the gods. After these offerings were made, they all drank. After breakfast the next day, Shinondi took me a visit to the homes of some other villagers. They all greeted me with profound respect, but some asked Shinondi not to take me into their houses because they didn't want me to see how poor they are. All the houses have a low shelf with a few fine items on it, but aside from this, their houses are bare. The animal skins they sell every year are worth enough to surround them with nice things, but they do not seem to want or need extra things. The AinO are not Normans. They stay on the same land where their fathers lived, but they seem to be terrible farmers. Weeds crowd the crops of millet, pumpkins, onions, and potatoes. Hunting and fishing are the main activities of the men. Their indoor activities are to carve things out of wood, sake sticks, tobacco boxes, and knife sheaths, for example. When they are not doing this, they seem happy to simply smoke, eat, and sleep. The women, however, are always busy. They chop wood, grind millet, farm, sew, weave, and split bark, because this is what they make the clothes out of. The AinO bark cloth is an indestructible material that some of the lower classes of the Japanese also wear. Yesterday, the men went out to hunt, and I was left alone with about 7 women, including Mary's first wife and his mother. Some of the women we discovered spoke Japanese. After I asked them some questions about their life, they asked me about the life of European women. They began to open up, talking and laughing in a lively way. In the afternoon, a fine young AinO came up from the coast, where he had been fishing. This was Mary's adopted son, named Pipchari. He had cut his foot on the road and asked me to look at it. When I tried to wash the wound, he said he didn't want me to touch it because his foot was too dirty and my hands were too white. When I finished dressing his wound, he bowed low and kissed my hand. Pipchari was very curious about my things. He looked at my scissors, touched my boots, and watched me as I wrote. He says he doesn't drink sake, and others stay away from him because they think the gods are angry with him for not drinking. Last night, I went to see a woman who the AinO said was having trouble breathing. I found her lying on a mat, weak and struggling with bronchitis. I visited several times. At one point, I was afraid the woman was going to die, but I was able to make her better with chlorodyne, beef tea, and close monitoring. The people were so overjoyed that they invited me to see the shrine. The next day, they took me up a steep cliff. I felt honored and humbled to be standing before the shrine where no other foreigner had been. The shrine is a simple wooden structure standing at the edge of a cliff. When they opened the sliding doors, they all bowed. There was a sheriff at the back holding a brass figure of Yoshitsune, 2 candlesticks, some metal gohei, and a picture of a Chinese boat. They rang the bell 3 times, bowed 3 times, and made 6 offerings of sake to the figure of Yoshitsune. They asked me to worship their god, but I told them I could not, due to my own religion. They were too polite to press any further. Old Muroran Volcano Bay, Yezo, September the 2nd. I'm now back in Shiraoi. I like it here very much. There are interesting volcano landscapes all around, which I spent all day yesterday exploring with an AinO guide. I was curious to find out if a nearby mountain ridge were actually a series of volcanic tufa cones. My silent, kind, and trustworthy AinO guide and I set off without Ito and had a splendid day. There was a great deal to learn and see. After an exhausting trek through jungle, we reached the side of one of the mountains. There was steam and smoke coming out of a crack in the mountain wall. When I put my arm in, I had to pull it out quickly because it was so hot. Further on, we came to a spring hot enough to burst one of my thermometers. The ridge I was delighted to find was indeed made of tufa cones. Although it was an exhausting journey, in which both my guide and I got kicked off our horses, fell into mud, and got scratched and cut by the jungle, I enjoyed that exploration more than anything. Continued. This morning, I left Shiraoi in a kuruma pulled by 2 kind savages. With the recent rainstorms, many of the roads were washed out. and I had to get out of the kuruma and walk much of the way. But each time I got back into the kuruma, the AinOs fixed my ear pillow and put a blanket over me. It is wonderful. We all have one language in common, kindness. A smile anywhere in the world means the same thing. At Horobetsu, I hired a horse to bring me to Old Mororan. It was the strongest, prettiest horse I have seen in Japan so far. But it rained during our whole journey, and I arrived in Old Mororan completely soaked. Now it's midnight, but I'm still awake trying to dry my bed and clothes by the fire. Hakodate, Yezo, September the 14th, 1878. This is my last day in Yezo. The sun shining over the windy gray capital is touching the peaks of KomoNo-takI with shades of pink and red. My last impression of this place, like my first, are bright. The bay is deep blue, sprinkled with violet shadows. There are about 60 junks floating on it, with the great white sails. They are still as fascinating as when I saw them first in the Gulf of Yedo. I finally parted with Ito today. It made me sad, and I miss him already. He served me faithfully, and he was a great source of information. He has gone to M.Maries, who will be a strong, manly master and teach him to be a good boy. I'm glad of that. Before Ito left, he wrote a letter to the governor of Mororan, thanking him on my behalf for the use of his kuruma and other courtesies. HBM's legation, Yedo, September the 21st. When I boarded the Hyogomaru, the calm seas and steady barometer promised a quick 50-hour trip to Yokohama. However, when we got underway, we were hit by a sudden typhoon, making the sea journey one of the worst in my life. The typhoon, or revolving hurricane, lasted 25 hours, and we finally arrived in Yokohama after 72 hours. We landed near midnight in the 17th, only to find much disaster. The whole region was flooded. The railway to the capital was shut down. There were rumors of revolts. People were worried about the rice crop. The value of paper money was down 13%. Later in the afternoon, the railroad was reopened, and the travel to Tokyo. The city is looking its best. Its yashiki look handsome. The castle moat is filled with lotus, and the grass is a brilliant green. Tokyo seems peaceful now. The men who led the revolt were caught. People say they were torched, and 52 of them were shot. It has been a bad summer. Surely things will change soon, the people say. But they were saying that when I arrived here in May. HBM's legation, Yedo, December 18th. I've spent the last 10 days here pleasantly, going to dinner parties, shopping, and making excursions to the famous temples of Ikegami, to Enoshima, and to Kamakura. Of all these various activities, I'll mention only one site, the cremation grounds of Kirigaya. SirParkes applied for permission for me to see it. A few days later, permission was granted from the governor himself. I went to see him at his fine yashiki. Mr. KusAmoto, the governor, is a well-bred man and very capable. He asked me about my travels in the north and asked for my honest criticism. I know, however, that in the east, one should not take this request literally, so I simply said the roads were in a bad state. Mr. KusAmoto invited me to use his own interpreter and carriage to go to Meguro. So we drove for an hour to a little suburb of hills and valleys, full of red camellias and bamboo. We came to a little gray building with chimneys and high roof. This was a crematorium. There was also a little temple clad with religious images and red urns for sale. Beyond this were 4 rooms with earthen floors and walls, all very clean and unremarkable. The rooms were empty except for several pairs of stone supports. In the largest room, several bodies are burned at a time, and the cost is only 1 yen. After the funeral service, the body is brought here. There are 5 tubs in the large room, containing the bodies of servants and poor laborers. In the small rooms, there are long pine boxes containing the bodies of middle-class people. At 8 p.m., each coffin is placed on the stone supports, and a fire is lit underneath it. By 6 a.m., the body has become a little pile of ashes. This is placed in an urn and given to the mourning family. The family then buried the urn, sometimes with a priest attending. 13 bodies were burned the night before my visit. It was surprising how clean the whole process was. There was absolutely no smell. The simplicity of it all is remarkable, and there's no doubt it is a very effective and cheap way to destroy corpses. S.S. Walker, Christmas Eve, 1878. The snow-covered top of Fujisan was turning red in the sunrise above the surrounding forests of Mississippi Bay when we steamed out of Yokohama Harbor on the 19th. 3 days later, I had my last glimpse of Japan, a wretched coast being beaten by the sea.